They laughed at the delivery guy, mocked him, ignored him, until the day he walked in, not as a delivery man with a package, but as their boss with their termination papers. For 10 years, Ethan Carter had been delivering packages in downtown Phoenix. He knew every shortcut, every back entrance, and every receptionist who barely looked up when he dropped off a package. His job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and he took pride in doing it well. Most people barely noticed him, just another delivery guy in a uniform. To them, he was part of the background, someone who didn't matter. But at Bradley and Company, a fancy marketing firm with glass walls and expensive furniture, that attitude was even worse. The first time Ethan stepped into their sleek office, he expected just another drop-off. But then, he noticed the way they looked at him, like he was invisible, or worse, like he didn't belong. The receptionist barely glanced at him as she signed for the package, already moving on to something more important. That was fine. He was used to it. But after a while, he started to notice more. The whispers, the smirks, the quiet chuckles as he walked past. At first, he ignored it. Maybe he was imagining things. But one afternoon, as he placed a package on the counter, he heard it, loud and clear. "Man, can you imagine if the delivery guy was our boss?" Laughter erupted across the office. Ethan didn't turn around, but he felt the heat rise in his chest. He recognized the voice. Lucas Grant, one of the senior executives, always dressed in expensive suits, always making jokes that everyone pretended were funny. Then another voice, Samantha Price. "Please," she scoffed. "He's used to lifting boxes and not leading meetings." More laughter. Ethan kept his face neutral. He slid the delivery tablet across the counter for the receptionist to sign. She handed it back without a word. He had dealt with worse before, but something about this moment stuck with him. It wasn't just what they said. It was how they said it. With confidence, like they truly believed. Someone like him could never be in charge. As he walked toward the exit, past rows of glass-walled offices where people sipped overpriced coffee and pretended to work, he caught his own reflection in the glass doors, his uniform, the delivery scanner clipped to his belt, his hands, rough from years of lifting boxes. That's all they saw, and for the first time in a long time, that bothered him. That afternoon, Ethan drove back to his small apartment in Mesa. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom place with old carpet and a tiny kitchen. But it was his. He parked his van and sat in the driver's seat for a long time, gripping the steering wheel. Normally, he wouldn't care what people thought of him. He had told himself for years. As long as he worked hard and earned an honest living, nothing else mattered. But tonight, that logic wasn't working. The way they laughed at him. Back at Bradley and Company, it wasn't just ignorance, it was certainty. They truly believed he would always be just a delivery guy. That thought sat in his chest, like a weight. He pulled out his phone and called the one person who always knew what to say, his older brother Marcus. The phone rang twice. Then, "Yo, you good?" Ethan sighed. "Yeah, just had one of those days." Marcus chuckled. "Let me guess. Some rich people made you feel like you didn't belong in their space." Ethan exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "Something like that." Marcus didn't say anything right away. He never rushed to speak. He just listened. Then Ethan said, "They laughed." "Who?" "The people at Bradley and Company. I heard them laughing about the idea of me being anything more than a delivery guy." Silence. Then Marcus finally spoke. "Good." Ethan frowned. "Good. Yeah, Marcus said. It means you're finally tired of it. Ethan leaned back in his seat, staring at the dim streetlight outside his window. So, what am I supposed to do? He asked. Quit my job because some idiots don't respect me. Nah, Marcus said, you're smarter than that. Smarter than them. Ethan didn't answer, because the truth was, he was smarter than them. Since he was a teenager, he had always been good with numbers, with business, with spotting opportunities before others did. At 16, he made his first few $1,000s flipping rare sneakers. At 20, he was buying and selling used cars, turning small deals into big profits. Later, he started investing, stocks, real estate, struggling businesses quietly, behind the scenes. But he had never gone all in. Until now, Marcus's voice broke the silence. Remember what Dad used to say? When people only see you one way, you've got two choices. Prove them right, or prove them wrong. Ethan closed his eyes for a second. Yeah, I remember. Marcus paused. So, what are you going to do? Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he thought about Bradley and company, the expensive suits, the arrogance, the way they had laughed, so sure he could never be in charge. He looked at the worn steering wheel in front of him, then at the stack of delivery invoices sitting on his dashboard. This wasn't all he was. He knew that. But they didn't, and that needed to change. This wasn't all he was. He knew that, but they didn't, and that needed to change. Because proving them wrong wouldn't happen overnight. But it was going to happen. Ethan wasn't just a delivery guy. That was the part of himself he let people see. The part that was easy for others to label and dismiss. But behind the uniform and the long work days, there was another side of him, one that very few people knew about. Because while the employees of Bradley and Company spent their days working on fancy marketing campaigns and making overpriced presentations, Ethan had been building something real. He had a sharp mind for business. Since he was young, he had found ways to make money. When other kids spent their allowance, he flipped sneakers, buying limited editions, selling them for double, sometimes triple the price. By 20, he was flipping used cars, learning how to negotiate, spotting good deals before anyone else. He moved into stocks, investing in small businesses, analyzing numbers, turning around companies that were struggling, and for the past year, he had been working on something even bigger, a business proposal, something that had caught the attention of serious investors, people who didn't care about where he came from or what he did for a living. They cared about what he knew, and what he knew was opportunity. Bradley and Company was in trouble. They didn't know it yet, but Ethan had been watching them. He had studied their finances, their client lists, their biggest mistakes. They looked successful on the surface. Shiny office, well-dressed executives. But beneath it all, they were sinking. Clients were leaving. Revenue was dropping. They were stuck in old strategies while the industry moved forward. Ethan had the numbers to prove it. And now, he had investors willing to back him. One evening, he sat in a private lounge downtown, across from his lead investor, Jonathan Wells, a sharp businessman who had built his fortune in real estate, the kind of man who didn't waste time on people who weren't serious. Wells took a sip of his espresso. Tell me again, Carter, why Bradley and Company? Ethan leaned forward. Because they're on the edge of collapse, and they don't even see it. Wells raised an eyebrow. Explain. Ethan pulled a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. He flipped it open, pointing to the highlighted sections. They've been losing clients for a year straight. Their strategies are outdated. Their spending is reckless. They're bleeding money. And their leadership has no idea how to fix it. If nothing changes, they'll either have to downsize or sell within 6 months. Wells studied the papers, flipping through the pages carefully. And you want to be the one to buy them out? Ethan didn't hesitate. I don't just want to buy them. I want to turn them around, restructure, cut the dead weight, bring in real talent, make them profitable again. Wells sat back in his chair, tapping his fingers against the table. It's a bold move. Ethan didn't blink. It's a smart move. Wells chuckled, shaking his head slightly. You've got confidence. I'll give you that. He took another sip of his espresso, then set the cup down, reached into his jacket pocket, and pulled out a check. Sliding it across the table, he met Ethan's eyes. You've got my backing. Don't make me regret it. Ethan picked up the check. He didn't need to look at the amount. He already knew it was exactly what he needed to make the first move. Buying a company wasn't like flipping a car or investing in stocks. It took strategy, patience, and knowing exactly when to strike. Ethan had spent months studying Bradley and Company, their finances, their weak points, every mistake they had made. And he wasn't the only one who saw the company's downfall coming. Rumors were already spreading in the industry. Talks of layoffs, clients pulling out, employees whispering about restructuring. Some people in the company felt the shift. Others, they were in denial, convinced their firm was untouchable. But Ethan? He knew the truth. And with Wells and the other investors backing him, he started making moves, quietly, strategically. The first step, securing the shares. Bradley and Company wasn't a public company, but it had multiple stakeholders, former executives, early investors, people who had put money in years ago, and now they were desperate to get out before the company collapsed. Ethan approached them one by one. At first, some were skeptical. A delivery guy buying into a major marketing firm? Sounds like a joke. But money talks. And Ethan? He had leverage. One by one. They signed over their shares, late-night meetings, careful negotiations, weeks of quiet deals, until, finally, he owned the controlling interest. He owned Bradley and Company. The final step was making it official. Richard Bennett, Chief Executive Officer of Bradley and Company, a man who had built his career on luck and connections, not skill. For years, he had been coasting, convinced that his company was secure. He had no idea what was coming. Ethan sent one email. Subject: immediate discussion required. Marie, Bennett's assistant, blinked when she saw the name. Ethan Carter. She had seen him before, dozens of times, dropping off packages. But why was he emailing the CEO directly? She knocked on Bennett's office door, stepped inside carefully. Sir, I just received an urgent email from Ethan Carter. Bennett didn't even look up. Who? The delivery guy. Bennett paused, then let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. You mean the guy from the lobby? What could he possibly want? He's requesting an immediate meeting. Bennett sighed, rubbing his temples. He was already in a bad mood. The financial reports were grim. Their biggest client had just pulled out. The last thing he had time for was nonsense. Fine, he muttered, waving a hand. Bring him in. Let's get this joke over with. Minutes later, Ethan walked through the doors of Bradley and Company. But this time, something was different. The energy shifted, murmurs, Stolen glances, employees whispering behind cupped hands. They had seen him before, hundreds of times. But not like this. No uniform, no delivery scanner clipped to his belt. Just confidence in his stride. And ownership in his presence. Even the receptionist, the same one who had ignored him for years, sat up straighter when he walked in. Bennett was waiting in his office, looking irritated. He didn't even bother standing when Ethan entered. "All right," Bennett said, barely glancing up. "What's this about?" Ethan didn't sit. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and placed a thick envelope on the desk. "It's about the fact that, as of this morning, I own the majority of Bradley and Company." Bennett finally looked up. A frown crossed his face. Then he let out a short, dismissive laugh. "You? That's impossible." Ethan didn't blink. "Check the paperwork." Bennett hesitated, then grabbed the envelope, flipped through the documents. His face lost color. His fingers tightened around the pages. His mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in his career, Richard Bennett had nothing to say. This was real. He wasn't the CEO anymore. Ethan leaned forward. "I'll give you until the end of the day to clear out your office." Bennett just stared at him. Speechless, Ethan turned toward the door, but before he left, he glanced over his shoulder with a slight smirk. "Oh, and Richard?" Bennett's jaw tightened. "Don't worry. I'm sure there's a delivery job out there for you somewhere." Bennett's face turned red, but he said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. And just like that, Bradley and Company would never be the same again. Owning Bradley and Company was one thing. Making sure everyone understood what that meant, that was another. As Ethan stepped out of Bennett's office, the entire building felt different. Murmurs, side glances, the sound of whispered conversations. People had seen him before, hundreds of times, but this time they were looking at him for real, and many of them looked nervous. He turned to Marie, Bennett's longtime assistant. "I need everyone in the main conference room. 10 minutes. Marie hesitated, half a second. She had worked for Bennett for years. She had seen executives come and go. But something about this was different. She glanced at the closed office door, then back at Ethan. Finally, she gave a short nod. "I'll send the email now." Minutes later, the entire company shuffled into the glass-walled conference room. Executives, managers, junior staff. Nobody knew what was happening, but everyone felt the tension. Lucas Grant, the same senior executive who had laughed at Ethan, leaning toward his colleague with a smirk. "What is this?" Lucas muttered. "A security briefing?" His friend chuckled. "Maybe they're laying off the cleaning crew." The jokes stopped the second Ethan stepped to the front of the room. Nobody sat down, nobody spoke. They just stared. Ethan let the silence stretch. A few seconds, then he finally spoke. "I'm sure you're all wondering why I called this meeting." A few nervous glances, people shifting uncomfortably. "As of this morning," he continued, "I am the new majority owner of Bradley and Company." A ripple of stunned silence moved through the room. Someone let out a small laugh, like they were waiting for the punchline. It never came. Lucas folded his arms, smirking. "You're joking?" Ethan turned his gaze to him, his expression unchanging. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Lucas's smirk faltered. Ethan reached into his briefcase, set a thick stack of documents on the table, the financials, the contracts, every signed deal. That made this takeover possible. "If anyone has doubts," Ethan said smoothly, "feel free to take a look." Nobody moved, because nobody needed to. The weight of reality settled in the room. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a mistake. Ethan Carter, the man they had ignored for years, the man they had laughed at, was now their boss. He let them sit with that for a moment. Then he spoke again. "I've worked in this building for years. Most of you never noticed me. Some of you did, and made sure I knew exactly what you thought of me." His gaze flickered briefly toward Lucas. Lucas shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. "I remember every joke, every insult, every time someone assumed I didn't belong." Ethan took a step forward, his tone steady, unshaken. "But I also remember something else." He paused, letting the words land. "I remember watching this company make mistake after mistake. I remember seeing potential wasted because leadership refused to adapt. And I remember thinking, if I ever had the chance, I would do things differently." He took another step, his voice carrying through the room. "That chance is now." A nervous energy filled the space. Some employees folded their arms, others stood straighter. A few, especially the younger staff who had been ignored for years, looked almost hopeful. Ethan looked around the room, then delivered the words that changed everything. "Things are about to change. Some of you won't like it. Some of you won't be here for it." Silence. Ethan let that sink in before continuing. "But for those of you who are willing to work, who are willing to be part of something better, you'll have a place here." He scanned the room, his eyes locking on a few faces. "This is not the same company it was yesterday, and it's definitely not the same company it was when I walked in here as a delivery man." Another pause. Then, with calm authority, he finished. "If you don't like that, there's the door." The weight of his words settled over the room, like a final verdict, and for the first time, the employees of Bradley and Company realized Ethan Carter wasn't just passing through. He was here to stay. The conference room was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. For the first time, the people in that office truly understood what had just happened, and then, finally, someone broke the silence. Lucas Grant let out a short, bitter laugh. "This is insane." He shook his head, crossing his arms. "You can't be serious." Ethan turned his gaze to him, his expression unchanging. "You think I'd stand here and say all this if I wasn't serious?" Lucas exhaled sharply. "So what now? You come in, throw your weight around, and we're all just supposed to fall in line?" Ethan didn't blink. "No, Lucas. You're supposed to do your job. If you can't handle that, you're free to leave." Lucas scoffed. "Right? Because you, of all people, suddenly know how to run a company?" Ethan took a slow step closer, his voice calm, controlled. "I know this company better than you think. I've spent years watching you all operate, watching the arrogance, the wasted potential, the outdated strategies. And I've spent even more years learning how to run businesses the right way." Lucas clenched his jaw. "You're making a mistake." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "No. The mistake was assuming I didn't belong here." A few employees shifted uncomfortably. Some weren't sure how to react. Others, especially the junior staff who had been ignored by higher-ups for years, seemed intrigued. Ethan let the silence settle. Then he reached into his briefcase, pulled out another folder, opened it, and slid it across the table toward Lucas. "Let's talk about mistakes, actually." Lucas frowned. "What's this?" Ethan tapped the open page. That's the report on your department. The one responsible for losing one of the company's biggest clients. Lucas's face darkened. That's not... It is. Ethan cut in smoothly, and I have the numbers to prove it. Lucas's fists clenched at his sides. Ethan stayed calm, over-promising, under-delivering, failing to adjust strategies when the market shifted. That client left, and took millions in revenue with them. Lucas's face burned red. Ethan shut the folder. So, if we're questioning who deserves to be here, I'd say you have a lot more to answer for than I do. The room was dead silent. Lucas's mouth opened slightly, like he wanted to argue, but he didn't, because he knew the numbers didn't lie. Ethan took a deep breath, then turned his attention back to the rest of the employees. This is the part where some of you start to panic, where you start wondering if you're about to lose your jobs. A few people visibly tensed. Others stole glances at each other. Ethan let the moment breathe, then continued. And the answer is, some of you will. The tension in the room tripled. Ethan gestured to the stack of documents in front of him. I've already done my research. I know who brings value to this company. I know who's been skating by. I know who's been taking credit for other people's work. Some employees shifted uneasily. Others squared their shoulders, determined. There's dead weight in this company, and I don't carry dead weight. A few faces paled. If you're here to work, to build, to help turn this company into something great, you have nothing to worry about. He let that sink in before delivering the final blow. But if you're here just to collect a paycheck and keep up appearances, he shrugged, you won't last long. Then, with absolute certainty, he said, termination notices will be sent out by the end of the day. The room lost all oxygen. Lucas took a step forward. You can't just... I can, Ethan said simply, and I will. Lucas's jaw tightened. His pride wouldn't let him be the first to back down. So instead, he straightened his tie, lifted his chin, and forced a smirk. Fine. If this is how it's going to be, then I quit. Ethan met his stare. That's the first good decision you've made in years. Lucas scoffed, shaking his head, then turned and stormed out. Slamming the door behind him, a heavy silence followed. Ethan let the moment breathe. Then, he turned to the rest of the staff. For those of you still here, remember this. Bradley and Company isn't just going to survive. It's going to become better than it ever was before. But that only happens if the right people are in place. His gaze moved across the room, taking in every expression. Some nervous, some determined, some still trying to process what had just happened. If you're willing to step up, to work, to build something meaningful, you'll have a place here. A pause. Then, but if you're only here because you think you deserve to be, because you're comfortable, because you think nothing will change, he gestured toward the door. You can follow Lucas. The room stayed silent, but this time, it wasn't shock, it was realization. Things had changed, and Ethan Carter was never going to be overlooked again. Epilogue, a new beginning. By the time Ethan walked into his new office, the energy in the company had completely shifted. Some employees sat at their desks in stunned silence. Others whispered in hushed voices, stealing glances at the man they had ignored for years. Some looked afraid. Some looked intrigued. And a few, just a few, looked inspired. Ethan didn't let any of it affect him. He had done what needed to be done. Now, the real work began. His new office, formerly Richard Bennett's, was bigger than he expected. Massive oak desk, leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He walked over to the window, staring at the skyline. This moment was supposed to feel different. He had spent years working toward this, fighting against every assumption, every dismissal, every time someone underestimated him. He had made it. He had proven them wrong. But standing there, looking at the city below, he realized something. This was never about revenge. If it was, the satisfaction would have already faded. He wasn't here to get even. He was here to build, because respect wasn't given. It was earned. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Marie stepped inside, hesitant. "Everything all right?" she asked. Ethan turned from the window, nodding. "Just getting used to the view." Marie gave a small smile. "I imagine it looks a lot different from this side." Ethan smirked. "Yeah, it does. And this was only the beginning."